Hi, welcome to Let 'Em Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo, and we have another great show in store for you. My guest joining me in the studio is Andy Worthington. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you,
and
Paul.
We're going to talk about maybe this is the beginning of we had our Christmas shows where we just sort of have fun, and just try to enjoy the holidays and that time. And now we're getting back into the serious meat and potatoes of what we like to do, and that is to talk about the 17th anniversary of Guantanamo Bay Prison, of which you are one of the most notable reporters and journalists who have been following this from the very beginning. And I think at this point, since it's been 17 years, and it's been quite a number of years since it was in the media, really, people don't even know it's still there.
No, that's the sad thing, is that some people don't know it's there. I mean, some people believed President Obama when he said he was going to close it, as though a president saying something means it's going to happen. Yeah. They've all been taking notes on that. Hey, we just have to say things and people think that it's happened. But then there are young people being born in America now who have no idea that it exists even.
Right. There's a place called Guantanamo. Well, it doesn't make sense because when you think about its history, Cuba is a country that the U.S. has been embargoing and doesn't have any relations with until recently. It's very difficult to get there,
right? Only
in a roundabout way, and you're looked upon strangely if you go, and you can't even buy cigars that are made there. So what would the U.S. have to do with Guantanamo?
Right. Yeah.
Why is Guantanamo even there in Cuba? Why is the U.S. in Cuba?
Well, they're there because they, from the Spanish War at the end of the 19th century, and what they got out of helping the Cubans was the beautiful easternmost bay of the island of Cuba, which is Guantanamo Bay, which they got as a coaling station, and then they turned it into a naval base instead, and set up. Sometime after that was when they set up this lease. Which requires both parties to terminate it.
Wow.
So Cuba can't terminate the lease because America never wants to terminate the lease. And they pay like a small, tiny amount of money every year for this lease.
Is that like overstaying at a party because they can't throw you out? Like, I don't feel like leaving your party,
Yeah, no, I mean, it's quite shocking, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's apparently how they own it. What the deal is for there. They don't own it, and they chose it very deliberately for their war on terror prison because, technically it belongs to Cuba, but actually they decide everything about what happens there.
How did Guantanamo get chosen? Do you know how the process that led to it being chosen as this prison for people who were arrested in the war on terror?
Well, all I can remember from looking at what came out of conversations was that the Bush administration was looking at Guam and Guantanamo at one point. So they knew they wanted it somewhere out of the mainland.
And you just mentioned a place that people even less know.
Right.
What's a Guam?
Right, okay.
It's this island that the U.S. has in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Right, if they'd chosen that, we'd know a lot more about it, I suppose, if those people who were paying attention, but they didn't. They chose Cuba. And and they did so very deliberately because they were looking for a place that was beyond the reach of the U.S. courts. Why would they want to do that? Well, they would want to do that so that when they held people there, they could do whatever they wanted with them.
Is this something that the president decided, or the Justice Department, or the Army decided? Who was behind this decision?
Well, it's that's a good question, really, about who was pulling the strings in the Bush administration, isn't it?
Yeah.
So. I mean, actually, I just saw Vice last night.
Me too. I saw it a few days ago. Right.
And and I'm very glad to see that film highlight things that I've known for a very long time. I mean, when I first got involved in the Guantanamo story, full time was about 2006. But any time that you got involved in what was happening then, the first person you would really come across would be Cheney, not Bush. But Cheney and Rumsfeld had worked together since the days of Nixon, and Nixon fell. And Cheney and Rumsfeld were young enough and uncontaminated enough that they then got to work with Gerald Ford, were some of the youngest people to hold high positions, and then they were also there under George H.W. Bush, like a couple of evil zealots.
They're just everywhere,
constantly turning up. And so Cheney was all over it. But Rumsfeld, Guantanamo was a military prison. So formulating how prisoners were going to be treated in the war on terror, in other words, being deprived of their rights wherever it was was something that obviously I think involved both of them.
How did you get involved in 2006?
Well, I actually, in 2005, what happened was that I'd been writing books about countercultural history in the UK, which involved civil liberties issues. So from civil and looking at legal judgments that have been made in the UK. And so from civil liberties to human rights, it didn't look like too huge a leap. And like many people outside the US, and I had been alarmed by what Guantanamo represented from the very beginning. Obviously, people who were really clued up in America were worried, but the general message that was sent out to US citizens was, we've been horribly attacked, don't worry about it. Orange jumpsuits, that's what people wear in the prison system. It was outside the US, people were, what the hell is this, when the first photos came out. And so by 2005, I was looking for a project, and it had just annoyed me so much that Guantanamo had been open for all this time, and that President Bush still
it was open
didn't
right
even...
in 2001 is when they opened it, right?
2002, January 2002. Okay. So by 2005, the fall of 2005, when I started looking into it, they still hadn't released the names of the people they held there, And so I found out that the Washington Post had put together a tentative list of who might be held there, and a British organization of former prisoners called Cage Prisoners had been set up that did the same thing. And I started trying to find stories of the prisoners, wondering which bits of these lists were accurate. And I don't know where that would have gone had it not been for the fact that in the spring of 2006, that's when the US government lost a Freedom of Information lawsuit submitted by the Associated Press, and they were compelled at that point to release the names and the nationalities of who they were holding, and I think about 7,000 or 8,000 pages of supporting documents. Their unclassified allegations against the prisoners and transcripts of these hearings that they'd held at Guantanamo to ascertain that these people were enemy combatants like they said they were, and that they could continue to hold them without any rights.
How do they do things down there? Like, how do you wind up in Guantanamo, and then what happens to you when you're there?
Well, if you believe the Bush administration, then you were captured on the battlefield and you were the worst of the worst. Really not true. What the United States was doing was paying substantial bounty payments to their allies, which was Afghan warlords and Pakistanis, quite often through the Pakistani intelligence services and even directly with the government.
Sure.
In 2006, the Pakistani then President Musharraf wrote an autobiography in which he boasted that in exchange for handing over hundreds of terrorist suspects, we received hundreds of millions of dollars.
Where did he get these terrorist suspects?
Well, he got them from, quite a lot of foreign nationals who had settled in Pakistan after the Mujahideen years. So people who may well have been part of the resistance to the Russian occupation.
On the U.S. side.
Yeah.
By the way.
Exactly.
Right.
And who had then subsequently settled in Pakistan instead of going back to the countries that they were from, probably married local women, were involved in charities or in teaching. And a lot of those people were just very cynically identified by the Pakistanis as people that the Americans could have.
Oh, I see.
And in Afghanistan, it was warlords who were doing that, because the United States government had virtually no information about what was happening on the ground in Afghanistan, because they had basically ignored Afghanistan for about 10 years.
Yep.
After all that money had been put in to fund the Mujahideen when the Russians invaded and occupied, when the Russians left, so really did the Americans, leaving Afghanistan to degenerate into a
well, the
civil
Taliban
war.
Hanging people from the end of a cannon barrel. I've seen some of those horrible pictures.
Right, exactly.
Treating women like dirt and all this kind of thing.
Yeah. And so the Saudis were still putting money into Afghanistan, and the Pakistanis were putting money into Afghanistan because they always interfere in Afghan politics. But the Americans basically walked away and didn't really know what was going on. So when they came to invade after 9/11, they didn't know who to trust. So my friend the warlord, and it's like your friend the warlord might well be lying to you and sending his local rivals to Guantanamo.
So it sounds like the slave trade. I mean, you just go there and you side with one side against another, and they give you their captives, and you can next day go and get their captives, the other side's
Yeah,
captives.
I mean, there are elements of it that are exactly like the slave trade. And I mean, it's shocking, isn't it?
The flesh trade, as they call it in that movie,
I mean, it's shocking because you think, no, surely they can't have done that. But they not only were they buying prisoners, but they also did away with the what are called competent tribunals under the Geneva Conventions. So,
what's a competent tribunal?
Well, when we used to fight, in uniforms on a fixed battlefield, then you knew who the enemy was. Sure. Anything becomes irregular about warfare and someone's not wearing a uniform, then how do you know you haven't caught civilians by mistake? Sure. So as the Geneva Conventions were, changed and refined over the years, then competent tribunals became a way of assessing, close to the time and place of capture, whether you had caught up civilians instead of combatants.
And who would be made up these tribunals?
Military officers. So 3 military officers would do it.
And they would check to see if they were really combatants or not.
Yeah, and the person would be able to call on witnesses. And I mean, it sounds... In this world we're now in, where from the Bush administration onwards, nobody's gone by the book at all. It's kind of strange to remember now that actually in the first Iraq War, the Americans held nearly 1,200 of these competent tribunals, and in around 3/4 of those cases, discovered that they'd got civilians by mistake and sent them home. In Guantanamo, no one got sent home. Everyone got sent to Guantanamo. And the instructions also came to the interrogators on the ground who were basically processing them. Every single Arab who came into U.S. custody had to go to Guantanamo. No exceptions.
So what's the logic? Did you ever find the logic behind all this? What are they trying to achieve? Or is it just like hatred?
It was hatred. I mean, on one level, you have to think...
If we can't get the people, if all the people who hit us on 9/11 died in the blast, and there was maybe a half dozen others who escaped who were later themselves captured or killed, then it's over.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not exactly World War II, is it?
No, I mean, it's hard
no glory there, really.
It's hard not to look at this and think that in some ways it was driven by vengeance and by just capturing people and then sending them that message to terrorize people into, don't mess with us, this is what we do. Yeah. But at certain levels within the administration, and I think throughout the whole of the administration, they also were attempting to pursue an intelligence-based approach to what had happened to them and who the enemy was and who they could track them down. But doing that so incompetently, I mean, it's astonishing. Yeah,
well,
it's quite
9/11 was if you go by just 9/11 was a tremendous. In '93, they tried to blow up the World Trade Center.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And there was many documents that were reported on over and over again that somebody wanted to get planes and fly them into the. It was common knowledge.
Right. Yeah.
It was often talked about.
Yes, exactly.
I reported it many times, because it was always like in the addendum of the literature from every sort of trial and everything that happened over and over again, and yet they still allowed it to happen.
Well, I mean, my understanding of what happened in the run-up to it was largely based on actually The Looming Tower by Patrick Wright. Did you ever read that?
I'm familiar. I had another person on who's done similar stuff here.
That's the one I read. I'm sure other people have
and that's a great one.
The FBI and the CIA having different parts of the puzzle, but not talking to each other.
That was part of it. But there was if you go some of the stuff I read, they were infiltrated heavily because they had allies, and a lot of the allies were not their friends, and they were giving training and stuff to people who were spies, like there were spies in our military. And there were spies from the Taliban and from Al Qaeda deep inside the U.S. military.
Right. Okay. That's very interesting.
They were spies.
Right. Okay.
Left and right.
And not the other way around because
not the other. We didn't have any spies in there.
No.
But they had spies all through the U.S. military and stuff.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah.
According to the story I got, and no reason not to believe it. Really,
no.
It makes sense. Actually,
no. I mean,
there were people who were seen. They were photographed at shooting ranges with military guys, and then their pictures turned up in lists of terrorists and stuff. and they were never touched. And it reminds me, we were earlier talking about Klaus Barbie and the Butcher of Lyon. It was like, where the Nazis were absorbed through Operation Paperclip into the American intelligence.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Very similar to that.
Absolutely.
They had data on Russia and stuff, what was going on. The U.S. is always, what everybody told me, I've talked to a lot of State Department people, all they cared about was Russia.
Right. Yeah.
If they thought somebody could give them information about Russia, they really overlooked everything else. And these people, the people who penetrated the U.S. system, knew that was a way to penetrate.
Right. Yeah.
To say you knew stuff about Russia, or to know stuff about Russia and give it to them, and then not tell them about the real reason you were there.
Yeah. Well, no, that makes perfect sense, actually.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I did a bit of background on that, but obviously the main thing that concerned me was what happened after 9/11 and how people were treated. But I mean, it was, it was impossible not to, it was impossible to try and understand who was at Guantanamo, to understand something about the context of the Mujahideen and the Civil War and everything that had happened. Because fundamentally, the U.S. ended up with, so it didn't analyze who it had, and it ended up with a whole load of people at Guantanamo that they didn't really know who they were, and then they didn't give them the information that they wanted, and they decided that was because they'd been trained to resist interrogation by Al Qaeda. Whereas the truth was, no, you've got a bunch of nobodies. They haven't got anything to tell you because they don't know anything. Because
that's like catch-22. How can you ever get out of that situation?
Well, I mean, it's awful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And because a lot of apart from the fact that there were clearly, honestly, hundreds of people at Guantanamo who had nothing to do with anything, and weren't even wandering around Afghanistan with an AK-47. For the foot soldiers, what they were basically doing was saying, these are foot soldiers who, all their religious people had told them to go and fight with the Taliban. So they'd gone to training camps in Afghanistan, and they're involved with the Taliban in some way, in an inter-Muslim civil war. And then suddenly after 9/11, they're enemies of America.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that some of them would enthusiastically have gone, okay, America, great.
It's a big leap to getting a job, coming to America, learning how to fly a plane and crashing into an airplane.
Exactly.
It's huge leap.
And one of the judges, actually, in one of the habeas corpus cases, where, for a brief period between 2008 and 2010, around 3 dozen of the prisoners got in front of a U.S. judge, and the U.S. judge impassionately looked at the cases and ruled against the government, that they had no case. Before that was then shut down by judges higher up in the D.C. Circuit Court, politically motivated. There was one ruling by a judge who basically said, I'm ordering you to carry on being held, because when the United States invaded after 9/11, you didn't get out of the country quick enough.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It's like
it's called catch-22.
It is really catch-22, isn't it?
Right. You can't, whatever you do, it's just going to be, they just raise the bar on you every time.
Yeah.
Right. So, all right, so how about John Yoo and all these people within do you focus on that in your analysis? Like who approved this and why it got approved and why they needed to have somebody in the Justice Department approve this?
Yeah, I mean, John Yoo's role in it is significant.
And he was an advisor to the president. He was an assistant Attorney General.
He was
Deputy
in the Office of Legal Counsel, which is the branch of the Justice Department that is supposed to provide objective legal analysis to the president about what is and isn't permissible.
And that would have been President Bush, George W. Bush.
Yeah. But I think it was clear that that's what Cheney and Cheney's lawyer Addington wanted, was the cover for everything that they did.
And you wrote this memo, right? It was the famous memo.
Yeah, the famous memo where it's not torture. It has to be equivalent to serious organ failure or even death to actually constitute torture, which he'd lifted and taken out of context from some medical insurance paper. I mean, it was absolutely out of context. It was a shockingly unacceptable legal opinion.
It's political, right? I mean, nobody
totally
like there's a certain grouping of Americans who would not want to see anything that even had the optics of mercy to anybody who even smelled the same air as the people who did 9/11.
Right, exactly, yeah. And so they wanted that, and then their justification for it, because, you know, essentially you're going to run up against problems with the laws and treaties and separation of powers in the United States, is to adhere to the unitary executive
If you brought
theory.
them into the United States, right? Unitary executive means the power of the president to do anything he wants.
Which was what was underpinning it all, was how can we get the president to be able to do whatever he wants?
Right.
You know?
Right, which is our new member of the Supreme Court is a big advocate of that. And Kavanaugh.
Who delivered some really not helpful Guantanamo opinions as well.
Right?
Yeah.
And what about torture? We talked about torture. Let's explore that. A lot of torture, a lot of waterboarding and stuff like that. How is it? Was it any different what happened as far as torture in Guantanamo as these black sites? What was the relationship between Guantanamo and the so-called black sites?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, the CIA had its own very specific program, which
Gina Haspel, we talked about, was involved in it.
And which I think was quite clinical in a lot of ways. Whereas in Guantanamo, what happened was that there were numerous different agencies. I mean, you know, I wouldn't be able to tell you how many different organizations were involved in the treatment and interrogation of prisoners, but some of them, their purpose was to gather evidence that could be used in future prosecutions. So, you know, that's the FBI's basis for interrogations. But other people were there on the basis of, you know, getting actionable intelligence and forget about the niceties of how that is achieved.
Right.
And some of those people were shockingly untrained at how to get from A to B. Even if that was acceptable that you were going to use this kind of violence, there was no proper framework for it. So in a way, if you look at the only visual evidence we've really seen of any of this, which was Abu Ghraib, where that was what was happening.
That was a prison in Iraq, which was made famous by the photographs that showed they were torturing.
Yeah.
They were humiliating. It was beyond torture. It was like some sort of personal humiliation. It was very homoerotic.
Right.
Very
and
weird.
they were given quite a lot of leeway.
Yeah.
They were actually told a lot of the time, you know, make sure these people don't have a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
But it was not, I don't think, necessarily that well defined as to what they were then supposed to do.
Just have a little fun.
To abuse them and
have a little fun with them.
Right, yeah. So
you get that impression.
So all of that kind of stuff happened in Guantanamo, where there were, you know, where there were all kinds of stories that emerged. You know, bits of the story got unclassified over the years. And one bit I remember was when I think it was a bunch of FBI agents had compiled reports of the things they'd seen these other agencies do at Guantanamo, which had just absolutely shocked them. So, you know, a prisoner who had been non-stop chanting verses from the Quran, and the so-called interrogator got so fed up that they literally wrapped his entire head in duct tape. And, you know, and the FBI agent was, you know, wrote, don't know how they intend to get the tape off. I mean, you know, just cocooned his entire head in tape.
Well, I see the kidnapping of that poor teenager. You know, the guy made her mother wrap her mouth in duct tape.
Right.
Before he killed her.
Right.
You know, and this is like, it's interesting parallels to serial killers, Charlie Manson. I mean,
well, they were fishing around for their reference points in all kinds of unsavory directions, weren't they? Because, you know, they had prisoners naked. They turned up or down the air conditioning, so it was boiling hot or freezing cold. You know, they threatened them with dogs. These are devout Muslim men, so they sexually harassed them. They got the women that were working with the US to do all kinds of inappropriate things with them. They played them really loud music. They played them white noise. They kept them awake for days. They had the frequent flyer program where they moved them from cell to cell every few hours, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, and sometimes for months, so they could never sleep. As soon as they fell asleep, they would move them to another cell, and the same thing would happen. Imagine that happening for weeks and weeks.
Horrifying.
I mean, you know.
And people who haven't, you know, even if they were charged and found guilty of the most heinous crimes, you know, it was outrageous. So where are we at now? Last few minutes. Is this institution is still open and there's still people there?
So the problem is 40 men are held at Guantanamo. President Obama did release nearly 200 prisoners, but he spent a lot of his time sitting on his hands because he didn't want to spend political capital overcoming opposition from Republicans, and then handed the prison over to Donald Trump. And the men held there cannot get out of that prison unless he wants them to. They are, call them what you will, political prisoners, his personal prisoners. There is no legal mechanism by which they can leave that prison.
He doesn't care if they did anything, and it's obvious they probably didn't do anything, but his base is red meat for his base.
Right, yeah, exactly. And so, there are a handful of men there accused of, the men accused of 9/11 are held there. But the trial system that was set up for them, the military commissions, doesn't work. It's stuck in a Groundhog Day loop of...
What would you like to see happen?
I would like to see, obviously Donald Trump would have to go, the Republicans would have to go, some decent Democrats would have to come in. So we're already, asking a lot.
Yeah.
All the nobody prisoners who are still left, and there are some people who did nothing before capture, but have reacted badly to their long imprisonment, have been on hunger strikes, have abused the guards. Nice. Come on, let everyone go, except the people who are supposed to have seriously had something to do with terrorism. Bring them to federal court, and and let's put the whole of the rest of it behind us. And
But federal court isn't the greatest place either, because we were talking about how, even though that is the civilian, and you are, at least, superficially have to follow the Constitution, there's problems with that as well.
Well, I think that this is the great irony is that the civilian courts have been too successful at prosecuting terrorism in which Muslims are involved since 9/11. The conviction rate is way too high.
What happened?
But if you're trying to solve the issue at Guantanamo, of these handful of people that allegedly did commit the serious crimes, and that yes, you have tortured, but that if we ever want a resolution, I think they have to go into the federal court system. You'd have to put your hands up and say, we did terrible things to these people, and we really know that this is the best way to break justice. But let's try with what information we have to see whether we can give them a fair trial. Would it be fair or not? I think that any all-American jury is probably going to convict the people accused of 9/11, regardless of how dubious the process is.
But Andy Worthington, thanks for joining us. I keep thinking at the end of every war, no matter how heinous what happened in those wars, the prisoners of war were released at the end of the war. So maybe if we ended the war, that would be the solution.
That's a good solution.
Andy Worthington, thank you for talking about this. Very interesting.